Across the Park podcast is proud to be sponsored by Globe Gas and Heating. For the best kitchen and bathroom renovations, boiler servicing and repair, and central and underfloor heating in the Northwest, head over to globecentralheating.com and quote Across the Park for a free quote. Hello, welcome back to Across the Park podcast. It is episode 2 of our pre-season 2024-25 campaign. My name is Ian Mills. Thanks for joining us on what is one of my favourite episodes we do each pre-season. We go across the Mersey to talk with our friends over at Tranmere Rovers with my friends, someone who we've just been talking off air, sort of give us our big break back when he was working for Radio City Talk. He was very kind to put the podcast on Radio City Talk, which is great for us. I'm delighted to have him here. Matt, thanks for joining us. How are you?
No problem. Yeah, very well, thank you. Very well indeed.
What have you been up to? I always ask you this every summer, and it seems like you're doing more and more and busier. You're covering a lot of football.
Yeah, last 2 weeks has been quite nice for me. A quiet time because the football season is very busy. Obviously, do stuff for TalkSport, do commentary for various companies, do writing for various companies. Got the podcast, as you know. So the football season's very busy, so July is a nice quiet month, which is sometimes needed. Well,
similar to me, you're a baby daddy, so it can't be that quiet if anything like mine too.
Well, yeah, that is true. I'm trying to get them into tennis at the moment. Successfully, it's working so far.
Okay. Look, we're here to talk the 23-24 Tranmere Rovers season review. We spoke last July. There was a permanent appointment of Ian Dawes. There was players in, there was players out. I did watch that show back recently.
And my prediction, I think, was probably correct, wasn't it?
It was. You weren't overly optimistic, but you weren't worried. You were just thinking, but what you did say, and it came true, is you were very, not adamant, but your prediction was Nigel Atkins would eventually be in the dugout. We'll get there. Let's rewind to that pre-season. When I look at the face of the transfers, when I look at the ins and the outs, the two names that stand out to me would be Jacob Dacres-Cogley going to Bolton and Connor Jennings. So, in hindsight, looking back, did the Dacres-Cogley transfer out hurt Tranmere, and how important was the Connor Jennings transfer?
Well, it wasn't just Cogley going. He was on the right side, he goes to Bolton, and you had Ethan Bristow on the left side. And he went to Minnesota and then actually ended up coming back to the EFL with Stockport in January. But Tranmere lost their two fullbacks, and for me in 22-23, the two fullbacks were the best players they had. They were good attacking weapons, they were good going forward. Both had pace to burn, which made it easier for them to get back if they were caught out of position. So to lose both of them over the course of the summer was a big problem, and it transpired that the left-back position never really got settled over the course of the campaign. Maybe it did towards the end of it, but there were 4 or 5 players who were tried at left-back over the course of the season. And at right-back, Leo Connor reverted back to right-back, having been a centre-mid the previous season. And he did a good job there. He steadied better defensively than Cogley, but didn't have the same attacking output. So to lose those two full-backs was always going to be difficult. For me to say they were the best attacking full-backs in the division in that season, so they were never going to be able to properly replace them. And it transpired that the players that played there, Connor Wood at left back, did an okay job, did a steady job, and has been rewarded with a new contract. And O'Connor did a fine defensive job, just didn't have quite the same attacking output as someone like Cogley would. And that's not to say Cogley scored a hatful of goals, and neither did Bristow, but they could put the ball in the box, they could get forward, they could make decoy runs, which I'm not sure the players who replaced them were capable of doing. So losing those two full-backs was tough. Obviously got money for Bristow, which was nice. Cogley left on a free transfer because his 2 years had expired. So that's what happens in League 2 and League 1 football, isn't it? Jennings coming in. I remember there was a lot of apprehension about Connor Jennings returning last summer from some people who had seen Jennings not struggle in League 1, but it took him a little bit of a time to adapt to League 1 when Tranmere were in there in 1920, and he then left the club and he was very ill after he left. He had cancer. He didn't play as much for Stockport as he would liked, and ultimately ended up on loan in the National League with Hartlepool. And people were saying, well, maybe that's his level now as a National League player. But I looked at it and thought, Connor Jennings was better than anything Tranmere had. If he came in, he improved the team. Was he a player who was going to guide them to promotion on his own? No, probably not. He's never going to score you 20, 25 goals a season playing where he plays. But he would raise the standards around the dressing room, and he was better than anything Tranmere had in those options. And he knew the club and is quite rightly a club legend. He scored at Wembley twice for them, and he set up the winner in the other Wembley final that he played. So you knew what you were getting with him. And I also remember that not long after he came to Tranmere, he had a bit of an injury, struggled a little bit, got sent out on loan to Macclesfield, and he came back and he was a different player. He played football regularly, week in, week out for them, came back and he just scored goals for fun for Tranmere from then on in and created them as well. He'd had that spell in the National League just prior to joining Tranmere for a second time with Hartlepool, and you could tell he's a player who likes to have football behind him, and he was brilliant last season. He was absolutely brilliant. He was a leader on the field, which they needed. He is a quiet leader. He's not going to shout and bawl and drag you forward in that way. He's not going to be a Roy Keane kind of character, if you like. But he is going to be someone who will set an example by what he does and by the way he conducts himself and by the way he plays. And I think he was Tranmere's top scorer or joint top scorer in the end last season. He was absolutely fantastic. He was a better player than when he left. So that was a signing that 100% paid off, and it was a joy to see. He signed a new contract subsequently, and I only hope he goes from strength to strength, because what he's already done for this club is legendary, and he continues to enhance that legend.
Well, it's great to hear that, because you mentioned there that Conor was ill for a while, so I think it's always nice to see, and it's nice for me to see, and probably most football fans, when I think of Conor Jennings, I think of Tranmere, so it was nice for me to see him back in that white shirt, scoring goals at the Tranmere Cup, celebrating. And a lot of the social media I looked at in the moment last season when Tranmere were winning games, and fans were loving Conor, and Conor was loving them back. So I think that's nice to see. From my point of view, from the outside, I mean, from the season itself, the start of the season, 1 win in 7. Teams here, I've got down Barrow, MK Dons, Notts County. I mean, the ones I imagine hurt more would be Salford and Wrexham, and I don't mean to get you depressed here. I will turn this back because it did all turn round in the end. But that period there, and this is before I get to the Colchester game, that period there of 1 and 7, and Ian Dawes, again from the outside, seems a popular figure with the Tranmere fans. But was that just too much? Were Tranmere fans feeling that it was time for, especially with Neil Atkins in the main stand?
He should never have got the job in the first place.
Okay.
I mean, look, it was an experiment by Mark Palios. He's been on our podcast and he's explained what he was trying to do in bringing him in. But ultimately, Ian Dawes had been Tranmere's assistant manager for 2 3/4 years. He'd been assistant manager under Mike Jackson, sacked. Assistant manager under Keith Hill, sacked. Assistant manager under Mickey Mellon, sacked. He then gets the job himself on a temporary basis, and he wins 2 out of 8 matches. And then gets the job on a permanent basis on the back of that record. Mark Palios talked about wanting to breed consistency within the dressing room, and he wanted to have someone who the players were familiar with, and he wanted to, I think he basically wanted in his, without wanting to phrase it for him, he basically wanted his own Liverpool boot room where you had one manager, and then if he was successful and got pulled onto another club, you just give his assistant the job, and you just carry on that kind of cycle. The problem is, no person has ever left Tranmere for a higher club. Like, if I go back through all the managers that have been sacked, let go by Tranmere, all of them have been on their way down or have stayed at an even level when they've left Tranmere. No club has ever come in and taken Tranmere's manager away. So what was the likelihood of it happening with Ian Dawes when Tranmere had at best been treading water for 3 years? Their league position had been getting steadily and steadily worse. They'd got in the playoffs in the first year in League Two. They'd narrowly missed out on the last day of the season, although it would have taken a lot to go their way in their second year. And in the third year, they finished lower down, mid-table. It was a big gamble to take him on as a permanent manager. And I think I said to you, by the end of October, Nigel Adkins will be Tranmere's manager.
He did.
I didn't want to see Ian Dawes fail because I never want to see any Tranmere manager fail. But there was apprehension there because there'd been no improvement anyway when he'd replaced Mickey Mellon. And I think you've got to think, as much as you don't want change sometimes, actually sometimes you just do need to rip it up and try again. And
Was that how you felt after Colchester? That was a step too far. Now you had to.
I've watched his interview after that game, and you almost felt sorry for him. He knew the writing was on the wall in that interview. Yeah. And it's Derek Jones, a good friend of mine who works for Radio Merseyside, who did the interview. And I actually texted him afterwards and said, you did a really good job there, because that is such a hard position to be in, where you're basically just firing questions at someone going, are you still going to be in the job in the morning? What do you do next week? It's such a difficult job as the interviewer to do that, let alone for the interviewee. So he had to go after that game. And I think it took... the performance was awful, and it took something like that to move on and move forward. They didn't move forward for a while, but it had to happen. Big change needed to happen. There were a lot of fans who were unhappy when Ian Dawes got the job, and there were a lot of fans who predicted that he wouldn't sadly last more than 3 or 4 months, because there was the looming presence of Nigel Adkins in the stands. And for those who don't know, Ian Dawes was appointed manager on, I think, the Wednesday before the final day of last season. And then on the Thursday, Nigel Adkins was announced as technical director. And a lot of fans were looking and going, well, why is Nigel Adkins, experienced former Premier League manager who's won multiple promotions, including 2 from this division, with Scunthorpe and with Southampton and whoever else, why is he sat in the stands when we've got this guy in the dugout who, as hard as he may be trying, has not yet produced the results that we would want him to? And that was always going to pile pressure on Ian Dawes, because people were going to look, well, this guy can possibly do a better job, and he's more experienced, and he's a former Tranmere player, and he loves the club. And it's so transpired that their predictions that he would eventually take the reins were true, because he loomed large.
From the outside, I thought that looking in, when you see the Tranmere results and you look at the league table, you think, with Nigel Adkins sitting on the front row of the main stand there's going to be fans clamouring. The board will eventually then act. But he came in initially not on a full-time managerial role. It was very much, I'm here on an interim basis. But and the first 2 months there, 2 months later he was made the permanent manager, but there was only 2 wins in that 2-month period. But did the feelings remain the same with Tranmere fans that you wanted Nigel Adkins as the full-time manager, just despite maybe... I know we kicked on after that, but that period there wasn't much of an improvement on paper.
I think they'd lost 5 in a row when he actually got the job permanently. I think it came, from my opinion anyway, maybe from others it didn't, but it came out of the blue. Like that he got a 2.5-year deal as manager as well, which is a long time in League Two. It's all kind of guesswork, but I almost wonder if they were playing a game of like 4D chess with Nigel Adkins. He'd been offered the Tranmere job before under Mark Palios. That's our understanding. And he'd obviously not taken it, because at that point he hadn't been Tranmere manager. And I wonder if Mark Palios just thought, if I get him in the door, he might just get the bug and he might get the feel for it, and he might think, do you know what, I quite fancy this. And then when Ian Dawes leaves, I've got Nigel Adkins sitting there who can take over. And then Nigel Adkins gets in the dugout, and Nigel Adkins suddenly thinks, oh, my club needs me here, but I'm really enjoying this as well, so I'm gonna give it a good go. Yeah. And he did give it a good go. And he got the bug and clearly signed the permanent contract, but came out of the blue when it did come to that, because, as you say, form hadn't been good. Performances had been slightly better. They were tighter under Ian Dawes. They were more open, but they continued playing in the same way, formation-wise, under Ian Dawes and under Nigel Adkins, which I found quite strange at the time. And I remember being on the podcast, and we were just calling for clarity. Because I think it was 5, 6, 7 weeks between Ian Dawes being sacked and Nigel Adkins getting the job permanently. It was first weekend of September Ian Dawes went, I think, wasn't it, there or thereabouts? And I think it was back end of October when Nigel Adkins gets the job permanently. So it's quite a long period.
November 2nd, yeah.
And we were calling for clarity, because I think it wasn't just the fans that needed it. It was probably the players that needed it as well. They were playing for a manager who, he could be there 1 week, he might not be there the next week. They didn't know, because he was only a temporary boss. So when that clarity came, that kicked off a run of results. There were other things that changed in that period as well, but it kicked off and they improved.
You've actually just jumped ahead. The question I was going to ask you, and I still will, so you can expand on that, is, look, the ink wasn't even dry really, and then Tranmere just went on this brilliant run. And I've got down here, I told you I'd make this better for you than I did at the start. 3-0 against Forest Green, wins against Gillingham, Newport, Swindon, draws at Sutton and Mansfield, I'm going to get to Boxing Day in a minute, but that period there, is that just, in your opinion, the feel-good factor is rolling on, the players with clarity and stability, and they're showing it more?
3 things for me. He changed formation. He'd carried on playing this kind of 4-3-3 or hybrid diamond formation that Ian Dawes had been playing, and it didn't suit the players. Like Christian Dennis was coming in off the right wing. I mean, Christian Dennis is not a right winger. He's put him in the box and he'll score you a hatful of goals if you've got him match fit. It just wasn't working with him there. They didn't have the players to fit into the formation that they were playing. But I wondered if, because he wasn't permanent manager, he was just carrying on and letting someone else, should they take the job, do what they want with the team. But he changed that formation and went 4-4-2, and it better suited the players he had. Second thing, Brad Walker gets fit and gets match fit. I haven't got the statistics in front of me, but Tranmere's win percentage with Brad Walker was around 40% when he started games. When he didn't, it was around 10.
Okay, that's a big difference.
So he had him in the centre of midfield. Big player. Loves a tackle, can find a pass. Made Regan Hendry a better player next to him. So you had him coming into the side. And then you've got the third thing, which is Rob Apter. Anyone who didn't see Rob Apter last season, for me, he was the best player in League Two.
On loan from Blackpool?
On loan from Blackpool. I mean, was part of Tranmere's academy when he was a kid, but when they closed the academy, he sadly left and obviously ended up at Blackpool. But he was just brilliant. And he came in August. He came in the August transfer.
Am I right in thinking it was a half a season loan and then a second half a season loan in January?
And he just sat on the bench for a few weeks and he didn't do anything. And then I think he started in a 3-0 or 3-2 defeat to Stockport back end of October, early November, and hit the post or had a couple of shots and he looked good. And then he started the next week and then it just went from strength to strength to strength. He got goals, he got assists, teams were scared of him. Absolutely brilliant. And from an Everton point of view, as I know a lot of your listeners will be, his brother's in the Everton Academy and is reasonably highly thought of as well. So there may be some excitement for the family there. But Rob Apter, I've spoken to players about it. One of them literally said to me, Jean Balayoun said, he kept Tranmere up. He kept Tranmere up last season, Rob Apter. He was that good. The goals he got, the assists. I think he accounted for about 12, 15 points on his own with the goals that he scored.
He's joint top scorer, I think, or maybe top scorer by 1 over Connor.
And he didn't come into the side properly until late October, early November. He was that good.
Is the ceiling high with him? If you take your Tranmere mask off and you're just a football fan watching him, could he be a player who could maybe move up the divisions?
Well, if he's anywhere near League Two next year, I'll be disappointed.
Okay.
Because he's too good. Unless he's with Tranmere, I'll be delighted, but I'll be also questioning why you're here. Like you've proven you can do it at this level. Next job is to do it at League One or Championship level. For me, he can play at least Championship level because he's got pace. He's got an eye for goal. Loves cutting in off that wing and putting the ball in the bottom corner. Pops up in the right position. So for me, really talented player. And just a shame that it never got to a point where he was on Tranmere's books as a full-time professional as opposed to them having to bring him in on loan. But those are the 3 things that made the big difference. And once they got a bit of momentum, they really did kick on. So
you, Matty, as a fan, where are you at this point? Are you able to attend a lot of games, or where commitment to stop on it? Or are you able to get to 1 or 2?
Got to about 7 last season.
Okay.
But watch, if I'm not there, I watch a lot of them through other work commitments. I do a lot of commentary for other production companies and get to see them play that way. So I do see the majority of matches, yeah.
Christmas, I always think my 2 favourite games of a season are the opening game of the season if you're at home and Boxing Day. And I don't care if you're away or at home. I always think Boxing Day, you'll take your turkey sandwiches, you'll take your drinks, you'll take your kids. And if you win, it's brilliant. You were very, very fortunate. Salford won, Tranmere 5 on Boxing Day. That must have been some Christmas gift. It was. They had a great run. I think they beat Doncaster, didn't they, just before Christmas? They got Notts County on New Year's Day, and they had Barrow in between. And it's the first time in their history they've won all 4 games over a festive period. They just looked brilliant, and you were beginning to at that point think they've got a chance here. They're coming from a long way back. I mean, this is a team that in November, October were pretty much rock bottom of the Football League. You're beginning to think they've got a chance here. They've got momentum. They've got 2 goal-scoring players in Jennings and Apter. You've got, fingers crossed at that point, Norris coming back into the team at some point after his injuries. And they just looked brilliant. The midfield was working well. The defence that had been so shaky earlier in the season was much more watertight. They weren't keeping the number of clean sheets you'd like, but
they weren't conceding the same number of chances. And in Luke McGee, they had a fantastic goalkeeper as well. So they were on the rise. The win against Notts County for me was better than the Salford one. It was just a better performance.
Okay.
I think they were electric that day. And at that point, it was just before Luke Williams left for Swansea. Notts County was still very much on the crest of the wave of coming up the previous season. You still fancied them to be in and around that playoff zone at the end of the season. And Tranmere hadn't really beaten many of those playoff teams. They'd lost to Stockport. The game against Wrexham in September was an absolute humiliation. How they only won that 1-0 instead of 4 or 5, I don't know. So to actually take the game to Notts County and beat them 4-2, that for me was a real marker performance. And unfortunately, they didn't kick on from that one. That proved to be the end of the real good run, really.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've got a question there, and you've sort of got into it. I mean, I say Salford's because a couple of my friends who are Tranmere fans, they went to Salford's. And as you do, as a football fan, when things are good, you get optimistic. And they were saying we're going to push for the playoffs. The form that we're in and some of the players' performances, and that was that was an annihilation. Only teams who were going up do that in this league, and it was full of confidence. And you're saying there was a bit of that. In the second half of the season, 7 wins, which wasn't really enough. Well, it wasn't enough to get you up there. When I look in black and white, and this is why I like doing this with you, because I look from the outside and you give the detail behind it. In black and white, it screams to me that there's inconsistencies for whatever reason, because we win at Grimsby and then we don't win again for 3, and then we win again, then we don't win again for 2. So on the pitch, the second half of that season, is it fair to say that it was quite inconsistent?
It was inconsistent, but I think teams worked out how to play Tranmere to a degree as well. Look at the teams who they lost to. They lost to Forest Green. They lost to Swindon. And they lost to Doncaster. And when they lost to Doncaster in February, Doncaster were in a real rut at that point. And that win for Doncaster, fair play, sparked an incredible run where they got into the playoffs, something about 10 in a row or something ridiculous like that. I haven't got the fixtures in front of me, but they lost to teams who basically didn't want the ball. Okay. So, again, I haven't got the actual statistic in front of me, but it was incredible. The amount of games where Tranmere had in excess of 50% of the ball, so 50.1% or more of the ball, they lost the majority of them. They won maybe 3 or 4 of them. Okay. When they had less of the ball, when they had 40-45% of the ball, when the opposition, when the onus was on the opposition to attack them and take the game to Tranmere, that's when they excelled. So I've said they lost to Forest Green, who were awful last season and got relegated. They lost to Doncaster when they were in a bad run. They lost to Swindon when Swindon lost 5 in a row at home at the point Tranmere lost them. But then look at the teams they beat. I've mentioned Notts County game. Notts County want to attack you. They battered Stockport. Stockport want to attack you. Stockport want the ball and they want to hit you. Yeah. They beat Wrexham at the racecourse, 1-0. Wrexham had far, far more chances than Tranmere that day. But Tranmere were just clinical with the one good chance they got early. And then were just happy to sit back and let the opposition do the running. And when the opposition got close to their box, they tried to close them down and snuff the chance out. Tranmere were a team last year who did not want the ball. Okay. They wanted you to do the pressing and the running, and then they'd try and hit you on the counter. They'd try and find that space in behind, because in APTA, they had someone who could exploit it. In Kieran Morris, they had someone who had a real hot streak for a 5 or 6 week period, who just found that right position to put the cross into the box or the final pass or get a goal himself. They didn't want the ball. So that's why they did really well against the teams towards the top end of the division. And this was happening pre-Christmas as well. They got a brilliant 2-2 draw at Mansfield, got promoted. But against the lower teams, they really struggled. And that was the frustrating thing. They didn't know how to play against a team who wanted you to do the running.
Do you know, listening to you reminds me so much of how my team play, Everton. We won games last season, and I'm sure you were there covering some of them, with less than 30% of the ball. I think the Merseyside derby, I think we just found a way to not have the ball and win. And then there was games at home where, I remember Sheffield United at the back ends of last season, they were gone and they give us the ball and we beat them, but it wasn't really convincing. We struggled. So my personal opinion with my team, and I'll spin this on yours because it might be applicable to you, is I say to Judgy and I say to some of my friends, we are missing a goal scorer. And when I look at Tranmere and I see that the 2 top goal scorers were attacking players, But similar to Everton, I don't see a number 9 who's putting 15, 16, 17, 18 on the board for Tranmere, and I don't see it for Everton. And I think when you play the style of football we play, and some teams give you the ball, if you don't have that, if you don't have a striker who will be a nuisance for defenders and know where the net is, would that be a fair assessment of maybe why Tranmere didn't get in the playoffs? They didn't have that big number 9 to put 15, 20 on the board.
Well, if we're being realistic, the reason they didn't get in the playoffs was because they were absolutely dreadful until the end of October.
Okay.
And they were never, that was almost an unsalvageable situation, to the point where going into Christmas before that 4-game run, you still thought chance they could go down here. That things have been that bad. So, I think they finished about 15 points off the playoffs in the end, 13, 15 points. They only needed to win 3 or 4 more games at the start in the first 3 months of the season, and suddenly you're thinking, top 10's on here.
Yeah.
And then when you get in that position, I'm not saying they threw games at the end of the season, because they didn't throw games, but when there's more riding on the trip to Accrington on the final day of the season, you've just got that little bit of extra motivation that you need, and I understand that. So ultimately, that's what cost them. That first part of the season was poor, but for me, the problem wasn't the centre forward area. They were unlucky in that Norris got injured. Norris barely kicked a ball until the end of February. He was the marquee signing last year. Brilliant performance against Harrogate in the second game of the season, Tuesday night. Battered Harrogate 3-0 at Prenton Park, and then barely see him after that because of a foot injury. But then he comes back in and scores that wonderful goal at Wrexham in March. So, to lose him was bad. To see Christian Dennis have the struggles that he did, because I don't think they played to a way that suits him, was a shame, because he'd scored 20 goals in a team that got promoted the season before with Carlisle. So they had the players there. For me, the problem was the centre midfield.
Okay.
I've mentioned Brad Walker and how the win percentage was really high when he played, or much higher when he played compared to where he didn't. The problem with Brad Walker is you can probably only play 2 in every 3 games or 3 in every 5, because he's just had fitness issues throughout his career. And that's the reason he's playing in League 2. If he was fit and playing every week, he'd be top end of League 1, lower half of the Championship. He's a good player, but he can't get on the pitch enough. And when he played, the difference in Tranmere's midfield, the difference it made to Regan Hendry playing alongside him was incredible. Since Tranmere lost Jay Harris in 2019 after being promoted to League 1, I don't think they've had a player who can properly grab the game by the scruff of the neck and drag you forward 20 yards. They had Spearing. They had Jay Spearing for 2 years, but Spearing was, particularly for the final half of his final season, he was on the way out.
You were a fan of Lewis Warrington, weren't you?
I was a fan of Lewis Warrington, but he's not that kind of player, is he? Lewis Warrington isn't the, I'm going to, look, over my dead body kind of player. He's a lovely little flair player in midfield. He'll pass the ball forward, he'll have a shot from distance, but he isn't someone who's going to charge back 30 yards, win you the ball, get up, scream at his teammates, asking why they weren't there, and then charge forward 20 yards and play a pass. Jay Harris was that player. Spearing on his day was that player, but he would freely admit that his legs were going towards the end of his time at Tranmere, and they never replaced either of those. They hope Brad Walker would be that man, but as I say, his fitness isn't good enough, or hasn't been good enough, and he's had an operation towards the end of this season, and you hope that'll mean he can get on the pitch more next season. But for me, that midfield area was a problem, because they didn't create enough for the centre forwards or the wingers. They didn't drag a game forward. They didn't dominate matches like you want your midfielders to do. And they didn't offer the cover that you would want to your 2 centre halves as well. So you weren't getting enough from them at either end of the field. And if you'd got a little bit more one way defensively, you would have conceded fewer goals. Obviously gives you a better chance of winning or drawing. And if you get a bit more from attacking wise, you might still concede goals, but you might score a few more as well. And Tranmere lost half their games in League 2 last year, there or thereabouts. Half their games. It's a ridiculous total. Just needed to. I think with a better midfield, they'd have turned a few of those defeats into draws, or a few of those. I mean, they barely drew 6-7 matches. I
noticed that, when I was looking at the results before, last night, I was doing my research, it was very much like, and that's why I said inconsistent, because it looked win, lose, win, lose. Yeah.
And I think that's the midfield area, and they've looked to address that this summer, which I'm sure we'll get onto. But for me, that it wasn't the centre forwards that were the issue; it was that midfield, and I think they're beginning to look at that and address it.
I've got a couple of questions, bit of a quick fire questions to end the episode on last season and this. Before I do, one of my friends, Tranmere fan, he doesn't shut up about this. Wrexham on the 16th of March 2024. Tranmere go to Wrexham. and possibly in real time harm Wrexham's promotion chances. And he said the train home and the minibus home was great. He said, ask Matt his memories from Tranmere doing Wrexham at the racecourse.
I remember I wasn't working that day, and it was a rare Saturday off. And obviously you look at the fixtures and think, right, I've not got a game this weekend. Liverpool or Everton must have been playing on the Sunday. Or it might have been Merseyside Derby weekend for the WSL, actually.
It would have been,
around
on
that
Sunday,
time. So it was an international break. So I had a rare Saturday off, and you look at the fixtures and think, great, I'll go to a game. And then you look at what game it is and you go, right, I haven't got a hope of getting a ticket for this one, because obviously they're going to go to season tickets and they're going to go to people who've got all their loyalty points or whatever not. So I remember following it from home, and going into that game, Tranmere were safe. There was no way they were going to go down. Forest Green were that bad. Mm-hmm. Like, they weren't going to get dragged into it. I think there were about 10 games left at that point, and you looked and went, I don't care if Tranmere lose every game that's left between now and the end of the season, as long as they win at Wrexham. It doesn't matter what happens, as long as they win at Wrexham. And they went there and they did a job on them. And it really annoyed Wrexham, I think, because Tranmere went there, didn't really make much after going ahead, and made a big deal of it. And look, fair play to Wrexham. They got promoted last season. I think it's the first year for about 40 seasons they're going to be in a league above Tranmere, or finish. It's the first year in about 40 years they've finished above Tranmere, but they haven't beaten Tranmere at the racecourse since '88.
Brilliant.
And that statistic will continue.
It will continue
for however long it takes before Tranmere and Wrexham meet again.
I love it. Absolutely love it. Look, some quick fire questions to close it down. Sticking with last season, best moments. Have we just discussed it? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's that simple.
Again, have we discussed this person already? If we have, do you want to expand a little bit? If not, go ahead. Player of the season for Tranmere last season?
Jennings.
Yeah. Why Jennings? Why not Apter? What was the difference for you as a fan watching?
Look, Apter kept them up, but Jennings, there's the emotional tie to Connor Jennings. Look, if people don't know his backstory, I'd really recommend they look it up. But when Tranmere got promoted in 2017-18, going into that playoff final against Boreham Wood, he was on a drip in hospital a week, 10 days before that game, fearing that he might never play football again. And then he comes off the bench in the playoff final after 30 minutes, because Tranmere are in all kinds of problems. They've had a player sent off. They've had another who's been hit by a bottle by a fan thrown from the Boreham Wood end. They're having to make substitutions left, right and centre. And the manager turns around and says to Connor Jennings, I'm going to have to bring you on, despite the fact that you were on a drip 10 days ago in hospital. And he comes on, and with 10 minutes to go, it's his cross that Norwood scores from.
Yeah.
A year later, he goes into a playoff final 2-3 weeks after the death of one of his grandparents, and he scores a 119th minute winner, and Tranmere get promoted to League One. And in League One, as I say, it took a little bit of time to get it going, but by the time that season was disgracefully stopped, he was really finding his feet, and he played a pivotal role in the famous FA Cup win over Watford after the 3-3 draw at Vicarage Road. So he's rightly a Tranmere legend, but to come back and enhance that status by continuing to score goals, particularly in the first half of the season when very few other people were putting their hand up. Luke McGee, fair play to him as the goalkeeper, was the only other one who was really putting his hand up and putting in a performance every week. For him to carry on flying that flag and leading by example, as I said before, it was marvellous to see. And yes, Apter outshone him in terms of productivity for probably goals per minute and chances and flair. But Connor Jennings is just one of those players that will never let you down. He'll be a 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 every single week. And that's what you love to have on your team.
Is there one moment that you wish you could change from last season?
Not one, no.
Is there a couple? Is the ones that spring to mind? You go, oh God, that was a low point, and I wished.
Well, the low point.
The decision in that particular moment was wrong in hindsight. Or...
The low point was losing to Wrexham at home.
Yeah.
Because they humiliated Tranmere. That could have been 4 or 5, and then they lost to Colchester a week or two later, and Ian Dawes was put out of his misery, and Tranmere were able to move on. But there isn't one moment that you could go, that's where it went wrong. In the 23-24 season, there might have been a moment at the back end of the 22-23 season where you could say it went wrong.
Yeah, get that.
But in terms of one moment over the course of the campaign, there were a multitude of reasons as to why they struggled, but there are also a multitude of reasons as to why they improved.
Hopes for next season. Not only hopes, but as a fan, hopes, and as a fan, what do Tranmere need to have a better season? You've mentioned the midfield, I've mentioned a striker possibly, but what are your hopes that in order to get those hopes and dreams, what do Tranmere have to do? Because there's still a long time left in this transfer window. We're only at the start of July. What do they need and what are your hopes?
So they brought in 5 players at the time of recording. It's a month to go until the season starts. So as you say, there is plenty of time. I'm quite excited about the players they've brought in. They brought in Sam Finley in centre midfield, who played for Bristol Rovers, who I've seen play against Tranmere for Fylde and is the midfielder that they need for my money.
Okay.
I think he's going to be a really exciting signing. He will grab the game by the scruff of the neck and he will drag you forward. So I think they're addressing that midfield area. They brought in Cameron Norman, who can play right side of the defence. We'll see whether that's as a right wing back, as a right back, or as a right side of a back three.
Yeah.
But he is a player who has excelled at this level over the last 3 seasons, playing for Newport and MK Dons. Player of the season at Newport, helped MK Dons get into the playoffs last year, and he's come on a 2-year deal. I think that's a really astute signing who will challenge that defence and make that defence better.
Okay.
Josh Davison, who's coming up front, I know less about. I don't think I've seen him play against Tranmere. He played against them for Wimbledon last season, but he only played for a minute, so I could hardly say he played against them or I saw him play. I'm intrigued to see what he brings. I still think that forward line needs a little bit of addressing, but they'll have to move someone out if they're going to do that.
Okay.
And if they are going to move someone out, it's probably going to have to be Christian Dennis.
Okay.
And then that would depend on whether they can find someone to take him. But equally, look, if they get Christian Dennis match fit and if they play him in a position that suits him and if they play him or play a style of football that is catered towards him, he will score goals. He's shown that at this level. They just didn't do that last year. So I'm intrigued to see what they do with him. They've got to get a right winger in though.
Okay.
There's Hawks and Morris at the moment who want to play on the left. If one of them is to play on the right, you're upsetting one of them. Hawks has already said, I think, that he doesn't want to play right wing. He only wants to play left wing. So he's shoehorning or pigeonholing himself into that position. So you're going to put Morris out on the right wing? Probably not, because I'd say Morris is a slightly better player. So they need a right winger, because we know what Apter did from that position last year. They've brought in Sol Solomon, who some of your listeners may have seen play for Marine.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see how he does. And they've brought in a lad called Josh Williams from Connors Quay, who's 19 years old, but by all accounts was wanted by other League One and League Two clubs. Has played over 70 games of adult football in the Welsh Prem, getting his first chance as a professional footballer now. Excited to see how he does. They need more. They need a backup centre half, minimum one, and they need a right winger. But there are already positive signs to the signings that they're making. That improve the squad. And last summer, I don't think the signings that they made generally improved the squad as a whole.
Feel different this season, this summer.
But McGee clearly improved the squad. Clearly, Connor Jennings improved the squad. Norris wasn't fit, so we can't really claim that he improved the squad because he didn't play enough. The same goes for Dennis. He didn't play enough to say that. On paper he improved the squad, but realistically, those two didn't play enough football certainly in the first half of last season.
So with how you're feeling now, and you maybe get the centre half and you maybe get the right winger, are you looking hope? I know in pre-season everyone's full of hope and optimism, but realistically, would you be looking for Tranmere to push towards the playoffs next season?
I think if Tranmere are a League Two club, you cannot ever say that they're not looking to be in the top 7. I don't want to sound arrogant there.
No, it doesn't.
I don't want to sound like, we're Tranmere, Rovers, whatever. But I've been watching Tranmere since 1995. So the first 6 years that I watched Tranmere, they were in the Championship. For the next 13 years, they were in League One. Mm-hmm. So for the first 19 years of my life supporting Tranmere, they were at a higher level than they were playing at now. Now, granted, we're 10 years on from that. 10 years on since their first relegation to League Two. And they've only played one of the last 10 years in League One. And that season was a mess because it got stopped because of coronavirus. Yeah. And they got demoted. But I see Tranmere as a bigger club than League Two. And they should always have the ability to compete at League Two level for a top 7 place. And that's what's been frustrating over the last 2 years, is that they haven't been able to maintain a consistent enough run to compete. Now, if we go back to 22-23, there was a period when they were challenging and they were second in the table for quite a period of time. And you were thinking, this is going to be the year, but it fell away. Yeah. Last year, it never happened. They were never close. Yeah, there were times when we thought it might get close, but it didn't happen. So for me, without wanting to sound arrogant, if you are Tranmere in League Two, your ambition should be at the very minimum to be top 7. Are they capable of that next year? I think League Two is more open than it's been for a long, long time. Last year, if you went into League Two and you looked at the 24 teams in there at the start of the season, one, you wouldn't have predicted Forest Green would go down because you'd probably think that they would do all right again, having come down from League One. Yeah. But also you'd go, Wrexham are coming up and they're going to be good, unfortunately. Yeah. Notts County are coming up and you'd expect them to do all right. They tailed away as it turned out. Stockport got to the playoff final the year before and lost to Carlisle. They're going to be there or thereabouts. Mansfield have been there for the last few years. They'll be there or thereabouts. Well, 3 of them got promoted. And the other, Notts County, was there or thereabouts for a while and then fell away. I don't see, other than MK Dons, I don't see anyone this year that I would look at and go, they are going to be definite top 3 next season. But I saw that with 2 or 3 clubs or 4 or 5 clubs you knew were going to be top 7 last year. So I think it's open this year, and I think that makes it more interesting. It gives Tranmere more of a chance, because if it's a more level league, that means the points that they'll need to get promoted or get into the top 7 is going to be slightly less, you would expect.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So they should be there or thereabouts, but they've got to get that right winger position sorted, because Apter was the one, as players have told me, who kept them up. He had the ability to turn a game to win you a game. Do they have a match winner in that squad at the moment? Maybe Sol Solomon's going to be that man if he adjusts well to League Two. Maybe it's going to be Josh Williams. Maybe one of last year's squad is going to be more consistent and more aggressive this year. But at the moment, that right winger, if they get that sorted, and it might be another loan, who knows, then they can be there. They've got to be top 10 minimum, but they should be looking at top 7.
I look forward to watching Tranmere Rovers next season. I really do. You know, I take my little boy across when Everton aren't playing, and he loves to go. His favourite stands, unfortunately for me, is the most expensive, which is the main stands. I prefer the one opposite. What's the
Johnny King?
The Johnny King. It's nice and cheap in there. I prefer that one, but he doesn't like. But I'll be getting over to a few games next season, and I really, really wish Tranmere all the best. It's great to speak to you. But anyone in a YouTube hole who's got a Tranmere friend, a Tranmere relative, or anyone watching who is not subscribed to the amazing A Trip to the Moon podcast, I'm going to hand over to Matt. Please tell them what it is, why it's so good, and what's coming up between now and the start of the season.
Well, I don't know that it is so good.
It is.
But people do seem to enjoy some of the content that we put out. Basically, we put out 3 shows a week during the season. In the off-season, it's down to 2 because there's no matches to talk about and news is slightly less. But if once we hit August, it'll be every Sunday there'll be a show out reviewing whatever match has taken place that weekend. There's a news show that comes out on a Thursday, which is looking ahead to the next match or looking back on a Tuesday game or whatever. So just talking about everything that's happening in Tranmere as well at that time. But the thing that I enjoyed doing most is a piece that comes out on a Tuesday, which is nearly always a former player interview. I've done over 150 of these now, so I'm slightly running out of players who are going to say yes. I am diverging onto other things. There have been a couple of other series that have kicked off this year. We've had something called 5 Games, where a Tranmere fan comes on and talks about their favourite 5 matches that they've ever attended watching Tranmere play. And there's a Rovers Relived series where I get 2 or 3 former players together and they talk about a specific match. So recently we had Richie Sutton and Jay Harris talking about the Boreham Wood final in 2018, or we had Dave Higgins and Nigel Adderley, who's a commentator and a Tranmere fan, talking about the Aston Villa semi-final loss in the League Cup in '94. But the former player interview that I generally do on a Tuesday is called My Best 11.
Yeah.
And I get former players on and basically just talk to them about their association with Tranmere. Whatever it might have been, they might have played 1 game, they might have played 500 games. Doesn't matter to me. Mm-hmm. They have still made some kind of history. They've done what all of us would dream of doing and play professionally for the club. So they've got a story to tell. And often I find it's the ones who are a little bit more obscure, who are maybe have less to lose, if you like, by saying the real honest truth as to what happened during their time there. And certainly that's been the case with a couple that have done recently, that they've been a bit more assertive with what they've said in terms of the stories of their time. But we've had some great interviews. Like Steve Copper was on recently.
Brilliant.
And he was just so humble and wonderful to speak to, and still held the club in such high regard, because for those who don't know, he started at Tranmere before Man United bought him, and obviously went on to be an England international. Who else has been on? Most of the Wembley winning squads of 2019, 2018, 91, 90 as well.
I was lucky enough or unlucky enough to be part of the the anniversary of Stevie Yates Day that you done?
That's a while ago. I mean, that's 3 years ago now. That
2020 was it, or 21? Yeah,
21 we did that because that was a 20th anniversary piece.
I could see you smiling, asking me all those questions.
I'm trying to think of the former Everton players we've had on. Derek Mountfield's been on. Because obviously Derek Mountfield started at Tranmere. There must be others, but off the top of my head, I say we've done like 150 of them, and they've been so fun. Ray Stubbs was amazing. Like Ray Stubbs started his career at Tranmere as a professional footballer, and then moved on to obviously have a wonderful career in broadcasting. So there's hopefully something for everyone in there, because I've spanned eras from the 1960s all the way up to, I've done one from last season already. John Bellayoun's been on, so. There's something for every fan of every age, I like to think. It's
brilliant. I've watched it even as I'm not a full Tranmere Rovers supporter. I do admire Tranmere, despite being the victim of a Steve Yates Day once upon a time. But great, Matt, it's been so great to get you back on the podcast. Thanks for escaping the Whittle to come over to the sunny side of Merseyside, and thanks for joining us at the amazing Pod Cafe studios. Enjoy the rest of your summer. There may be a trophy for our country coming up. It's semi-final night tonight. You never know. You just never know. Let's not Everton it. But Matt, thanks for joining us again on Across the Park podcast.
No problem.
Guys, thanks for listening. Any Evertonians who are still with us, that was episode 2 of our pre-season schedule. Episode 3 is going to be a special one. I'll be down to Winslow next week to talk to Dave Bonds, who was a friend of Kevin Campbell. We're going to put a bottle of beer on the table each, and we're going to talk about Kevin as a player. I'm going to ask the question about Kevin as a person, and I'm going to try my best to do a tribute to the big man. Then we're going to Goodison Park, and we've got some special guests at Goodison Park as we wind down, the curtain comes down on the old lady. But this has been episode 2. We hope you enjoyed going across the Mersey to speak to Matt as much as I did. Tranmere fans, please head over and subscribe. Go to the Patreon of A Trip to the Moon. I promise you will not regret it. Thanks for watching. Up the Toffees and up the Rovers.